I woke up like any other Friday, at 6 a.m. when my new puppy needed to go outside. My girlfriend was still asleep in bed, so I crept to the back door as not to wake her. We lived together in a modest two-bedroom house in Colorado. I hated these early morning bathroom trips since it was December and absolutely freezing. Sometimes I had to shovel snow just so my little Rottweiler puppy had a place to go to the bathroom outside. As much as I hate it, I always resigned to my fate of standing out in the frigid early morning air as the wind cuts through the jacket I barely threw on. I crept from the bedroom to where my puppy's crate was, in the living room. His name was Cyrus, and the cage kept him out of trouble throughout the night. It also protected him from the cats, who haven't taken kindly to him yet, and since he was just a puppy, he could barely defend himself. My cats were named Black and White Kitty for obvious reasons. They usually sat on the back of my couch when they weren't coming to bed with me for warmth, but they were nowhere to be seen this morning. That isn't unusual for cats, though, the way they stalk around their homes and all. I bent down to pick Cyrus up out of his crate. He was acting strange, though. When I opened the door, he usually came rushing out, excited to once again be able to chew on everything except for his toys. This time, however, he sat in the back corner of his crate. His crying had woken me up, and as I stood here trying to coax him out, he refused to budge and kept whimpering lowly. At first, I was a little worried, but I decided that one of the cats probably just scared him or something like that. I reached in and picked him up. Despite his squirming, I was able to get him out pretty easily. I carried him through the kitchen and out the back door, where we usually take him to the bathroom. I set him down on a fresh layer of snow that had accumulated overnight. It was less than an inch thick, so he was able to manage. He wouldn't leave from between my legs, though. Whenever I would step, he would jump under me as if he were hiding from something. I was starting to worry about him, but decided he might have just been cold and shrugged it off. I walked back to go inside, but he paused just before entering. Now I was weirded out. He always raced to get back inside, but this morning he was acting like he would rather be out in the cold. I looked at him for a moment and he whimpered as if in response. I decided to scoop him up and go inside with him in my arms. That's where things got really weird. One of my cats shambled over to me. I say shambled because I walked as if it had been hurt and was using all of its remaining energy just to move. I set Cyrus down and he scampered off. I noted this, but turned my attention to my cat. Something about him didn't look right. I turned the kitchen light on to get a better look. When I did, I was horrified and confused all at once. This thing looked similar to my cat in its markings and size, but looked wrong. Like someone had taken a picture of my cat, and it came out slightly disfigured. I can't quite explain it. It just looked like someone made a stuffed animal that looked like a cat, but it didn't come out exactly right. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid more from the confusion and the unexplainable than the thing itself. It is just a cat, right? It can't really hurt me. But was this my cat? And if it was, what had happened to it? I decided I was being silly and knelt down to see if he was okay. When I did, the thing freaked out and started biting and clawing at me. I'd barely made contact with it when I jumped back, but it kept coming at me. I feel ashamed to say that I ran from a cat. You would do the same thing if you had looked into his eyes. I wasn't running from it because it became aggressive. I was running because it had two pupils, one right on top of the other. I know what you're saying, and no, it wasn't a trick of the light or a birthmark. What made it worse was the fact that cats have vertical pupils like slits that let in the light. This thing had two perfectly round ones in each eye. I ran into the front room and frantically searched for my puppy. The thing in the kitchen didn't pursue me much further, but I could hear it growling in a low, hateful tone. Cyrus wasn't in his crate, or anywhere to be seen, so I assumed he had run to my room. I looked back at the doorway to the kitchen again. I couldn't see where the thing had went, but I could still hear it. I took off towards my room and burst through the door, slamming it behind me. My girlfriend sat awake on my bed, with a nightstand lamp on. "What's going on, babe? Is something wrong?" "Yes," I said, as I turned to her. "There is some thing in the house, and I don't know what it is." That's all I could say before I froze. In bed with my girlfriend was something that resembled my dog. The small thing sat at the bottom, away from Brooke. I immediately saw its warped figure and its eyes. They looked just like whatever that thing was in the kitchen. "Brooke," I said, "I need you to get out of bed and come to me." "Why? Tell me what's going on." "That thing at the bottom of the bed isn't our dog," I said to her. She looked at me confused, then looked back at the creature. It started emitting a low growl. She inhaled sharply and jumped up. She ran to me, and I stood between her and that abomination. I don't know what happened to Cyrus, or if that was what was left of him after something. I don't know what happened to him. Either way, I felt terrible for him. "We need to get the keys and make a break for the car," I said. She agreed quietly. The keys were somewhere in the kitchen, hanging up. Brooke turned the knob to the bedroom door, and, almost as if seeing we were about to escape, the thing on my bed lunged at us. I ripped the door open and shoved Brooke into the hallway. We went charging towards the kitchen, together, as I shut the door behind me. Right before we stepped into the kitchen, however, Brooke slid to a halt. Almost running into her, I caught myself on the doorframe. I wish I was able to wonder as to what had stopped her dead in her tracks, but I had a pretty good idea. I looked over her shoulder to see two of the things, each physically resembling my cats, standing in the kitchen, growling, and, worst of all, walking towards us. Their bodies were even more hideous in the light. Their joints looked as if they had all been pulled from their sockets, and their legs were all slightly different lengths. They moved the way a dead animal would move, if it had been reanimated somehow, driven by some force that made it look like a morbid puppet. "Run," I said to Brooke. "Run to the car. I'll be right behind you." She turned and sprinted for the door. At the same time, I ran past the creatures and grabbed the keys off the wall. I barely cleared them as they launched themselves at me. I wasn't sure what would happen if they bit me. I wouldn't have been so lucky, but their disproportionate bodies and irregular legs made their jump awkward, and they both fell short. It took them just a second to recover, but I was already in full sprint through the back door. I tore it open and tried to slam it behind me, but one of those things made its way about halfway out. As the door shut forcefully on its small body, I heard a sick crunch. It's a sound I'll never forget, as I could almost feel the bones breaking under the skin. I looked down, and to my horror, its ribs had been broken, and some had even penetrated its abdomen as they were forced down as they broke. Despite this, the thing still clawed at me and tried to bite. My face ran flush as I felt the contents of my stomach start to come up. This had to be a dream, right? This just wasn't possible. I was snapped out of it when the second creature ran into the door. The growls that came from the other side were different now. It sounded more like 1,000 voices all at once. Hearing this, I bolted for the car, so Brooke and I could get the hell out of there, so I never had to see those things again. I ran through the snow, my feet already numb from the cold, and made my way through the gate. Brooke was waiting by the car. The poor thing was probably froze half to death. I unlocked it, and we both jumped inside. As I turned the key, the car sputtered for a moment from the cold. Damn it, I thought, just as the engine roared to life. And we sped away. And we sped away. Not much was said as we drove. I think we were both in shock. We didn't know where to go either. We made our way to town, traveling faster than one should on the snowy back roads. The snow was still falling, and the sun was yet to break through the clouds that loomed over the mountains most mornings. I don't know what happened. I could possibly convince myself that it had been a bad dream if it weren't for Brooke. She was relatively silent in the passenger seat. I looked over at her to see if she was okay, only to see silent tears making their way down her face. I hated that. I wish I could take away whatever pain or fear she was feeling and take it onto myself. I looked back at the road just in time to see an animal standing there. A deer. Eyes locked on the headlights of my car. I wasn't going to swerve off the road for a deer, but I did try to avoid hitting it. I braked and tried to go around it, but the icy roads had other plans. I started to slide sideways as the car made its way to the snowbanks that lined the sides. Brooke grabbed her seatbelt and let out a terrified shriek. It seemed like less than a second before the car jolted to a stop in the snow. I tried to regain control of the vehicle, but it obviously hadn't worked. The wreck wasn't bad, and under normal conditions, we could simply be pulled from the snow and be on our way. I checked to see that Brooke was okay, and she nodded. I thought to myself for a moment. We weren't far from town by car, but it was a hike through the snow and the back roads on foot, and we had run out of the house without grabbing so much as shoes. We couldn't call for help either, as neither of us grabbed a phone. We would have to stay and wait for morning. It wasn't far off, and the car was still running, so we would stay warm. That's when we heard it. A gut-wrenching sound. It was a sickening growl, low and deep. No animal I had ever heard made a sound like this. Part of me already knew what it was. There, Brooke whispered softly, terror in her voice. I looked to where she gestured, and what I saw nearly broke me. I would call it a deer, but it was too mangled. It stood on legs that were bent in impossible directions, and walked into the pool of light emitted by the headlights. With each step, it looked like it would collapse. It never did, though. It's still circling the car, growling, and getting closer. I'm writing this as a record of what happened if help doesn't come in time. I don't know what this thing wants to do to us, or what it is capable of. But I can now hear the popping of what sounds like broken bones, grinding against each other, as it is drawing closer and closer to the car. I really hope the sun comes up soon.